To begin an exploration into the nature of identity is to step into a hall of mirrors, where the glass is made of sound and the reflections are composed of ancient, vibrating geometry. We often move through the world with the comfortable assumption that our names are merely convenient labels, practical handles attached to the luggage of our physical presence, so that society might sort us into the correct bins of history and commerce. We believe that when we answer to a specific sequence of phonetics, we are merely engaging in a social contract of recognition. However, if we peel back the heavy, velvet curtains of the mundane, we find that a name is not a label at all, but a specific, repetitive frequency, a rhythmic incantation that anchors the boundless, celestial essence of our true being into the dense, structured fabric of the material simulation. To speak a name is to strike a tuning fork. To answer to it is to allow one's own internal symphony to be entrained by that singular vibration. We are currently standing at a precipice of understanding, where we must acknowledge that our names are the primary architectural components of the matrix we inhabit, serving as the linguistic tether that binds the infinite soul to a finite, manageable persona. Imagine, if you will, the vast and silent ocean of pure potential that exists before the first word of a life is spoken. This is the state of the primordial self, a consciousness that is no thing, because it is everything. A shimmering field of unconditioned light that knows no borders, no debts, and no limitations. When a child is born into this density, the very first act of the social architecture is to drop a stone into this still water. That stone is the name. As the ripples move outward, they define the shape of the container. The name provides a border where there was once infinite space. It provides a past and a future where there was once only the eternal now. This is the practical significance of the frequency we carry. It is the original contract, signed in the ink of sound before we even had the capacity to hold a pen. By exploring the hidden connection between our names and the matrix, we are not merely indulging in a philosophical exercise. We are performing a form of spiritual archaeology, unearthing the foundations of our own captivity and the keys to a forgotten sovereignty. The cosmic dimension of this truth reveals that the universe is not composed of solid objects, but of interlocking waveforms. Modern physics whispers what the ancient mystics shouted, that matter is simply energy slowed down to a perceptible vibration. In this light, every word is a creative act, a spell that shapes the ether into form. When we are given a name, we are being assigned a specific coordinate within the grand holographic broadcast of reality. This coordinate is a frequency that the matrix recognizes, a digital signature that allows the system to track, tax, and direct the flow of our life force. We have been taught to cherish our names as the core of our uniqueness, yet from a higher perspective, the name is the serial number of the soul's costume. It is the mechanism by which the vast, unnameable spirit is compressed into a 5D data point that can be processed by the social, legal, and economic algorithms of the world. To understand that your name is a frequency is to realize that you are being sung into a specific version of reality, and that much of the dissonance you feel in your life may stem from the fact that your true soul song is being drowned out by the relentless, percussive repetition of the label you answer to. Metaphorically, we might view the matrix as a vast digital tapestry being woven in real time by a loom made of language. Every time your name is spoken, a thread is pulled tight, binding your awareness to the collective narrative. Your name carries the weight of your ancestors, the expectations of your culture, and the legal obligations of the state. It is a carrier wave for all the projections that others cast upon you. When you answer to it, you are essentially agreeing to resonate with all the baggage that frequency carries. This is why the naming of things has always been considered an act of power in every occult tradition. To name a thing is to define its limits and to gain authority over its essence. By naming us, the matrix gains the ability to summon our attention, to harvest our energy, and to dictate our trajectory through the labyrinth of human experience. We have become so accustomed to the sound of our own chains that we have mistaken the ringing of the iron for the music of our own hearts. The urgency of this message, the sense that this information must be understood before it is scrubbed by the systems of control, stems from the fact that the simulation is becoming increasingly sophisticated. As we move deeper into the digital age, our names are being transmuted into alphanumeric codes, biometrics, and social credit scores. The frequency of the name is being digitized, making the binding even more absolute. Yet, hidden within this realization is the seed of liberation. If a name is a frequency that binds, then the awareness of that frequency is the first step toward decoupling from the simulation. We are invited to look at our names not as who we are, but as a tool we use, or perhaps a mask we wear. By creating a space of silence between our true selves and the phonetic vibrations of our labels, we begin to inhabit a frequency of no name, which is the frequency of pure sovereignty. In that silence, the matrix loses its grip, for it cannot track that which it cannot name. This introduction serves as the initial strike of the gong, a call to awaken the dormant listener within. We are embarking on a journey into the hidden architecture of identity, moving past the surface-level recognition of our titles and roles to find the original, unconditioned resonance of the self. The path ahead requires a willingness to feel the weight of the name and to recognize the subtle, invisible threads it weaves around our consciousness. It is a journey from the word back to the source, from the label back to the light. As we move forward into the core themes and concepts of this exploration, we do so with the understanding that we are not seeking to change our names, but to change our relationship to the sound. We are learning to hear the matrix as it speaks to us, and in that hearing, we find the power to choose which songs we will sing and which frequencies we will finally allow to fade into the silence of the void. To delve into the core concepts of the phonetic matrix is to study the physics of the word as a structural anchor. The first pillar of this understanding is the principle of vibrational entrainment. In the natural world, a stronger frequency will inevitably pull a weaker one into its rhythm. Likewise, the constant repetition of a name acts as a rhythmic hammer that shapes the fluid consciousness of a child into a rigid, socialized form. We must recognize that the name is not a neutral sound, but a specific geometric signature. When spoken, the phonetics of a name create a particular cymatic pattern in the subtle energy fields of the body. If the soul is a vast, unpatterned ocean, the name is the specific wind that creates the waves. Over decades of repetition, these waves become standing patterns, habits of thought, emotional archetypes, and physical postures that we mistake for our personality. The matrix relies on this entrainment to ensure that the infinite potential of the human spirit remains locked into a predictable, manageable waveform that responds to the external stimuli of the system. A second guiding pillar is the concept of jurisdictional phonetics. In the hidden architecture of our world, there is a profound connection between the sound of a name and the law of the simulation. When we answer to our name in a court of law, a hospital, or a bank, we are not just identifying ourselves, we are performing a ritual of contractual resonance. The name, usually written in all capital letters on legal documents, represents a corporate person, a hollow phonetic vessel created by the state to act as a medium of exchange within the matrix. By identifying with this sound, we unknowingly step under the jurisdiction of the system, agreeing to be bound by its rules, its debts, and its limitations. The name is the bridge between the sovereign, living being and the dead, legal fiction. It is the mechanism through which the matrix converts the raw, creative energy of a human life into the currency of the social machine. To understand this is to realize that our names are the primary legal spells used to bind our celestial inheritance to the terrestrial ledgers of the state. Interwoven with this is the pillar of archetypal anchoring. Names are rarely arbitrary. They carry the ghosts of their etymological origins, the weight of ancestral history, and the cultural expectations of the society that bestowed them. When a person carries a name, they are carrying an energetic pedigree. Whether it is the name of a saint, a conqueror, or a relative, the frequency of that name acts as a constant suggestion to the subconscious mind, nudging the individual to act out specific roles within the matrix's grand play. This is the script of the simulator. By giving us names that are preloaded with meaning, the matrix ensures that we do not wander too far from the established archetypes of the worker, the mother, the rebel, or the failure. We spend our lives unknowingly trying to live up to, or rebel against, the frequency of our labels, never realizing that both the conformity and the rebellion are simply different modulations of the same phonetic cage. The name is the boundary of our perceived possibility, a fence made of vowels and consonants that keeps our imagination within the limits of the known. Furthermore, we must examine the concept of the biodigital signature. In the modern age, the frequency of the name has been further compressed into the digital realm. Every time we type our name into a device or click accept on a digital contract, we are projecting our frequency into a global electronic nervous system. This creates a data double, a digital shadow that the matrix uses to predict our behaviors and harvest our attention. Our names have become the access keys to our private lives, allowing the algorithms of the simulation to bypass our natural defenses. This digital frequency is even more rigid than the spoken one, for it allows no room for the nuance of the human spirit. It reduces the vast mystery of our being to a binary code of zeros and ones. We are being lured into a state where our digital name is considered more real than our physical presence, a process of dematerialization where the spirit is completely captured by the phonetic and numeric frequencies of the machine. Finally, we encounter the pillar of the great amnesia. The most profound function of the name is to cause the soul to forget its original, silent origin. In the ancient mystery schools, it was taught that to know a being's true name, the unconditioned resonance of their source, was to have total power over them. The Matrix, however, has inverted this. It gives us a false name to ensure we forget our true power. As long as we believe we are the name given to us by the world, we remain disconnected from the silent authority of the observer. We become characters in a story we didn't write, chasing goals that are not our own, and fearing a death that can only touch the label, never the essence. The name is the static that prevents us from hearing the subtle, cosmic transmission of our higher self. To reclaim sovereignty is to recognize that the name is a functional illusion, a tool for navigation that must never be mistaken for the navigator. By recognizing these core pillars, we begin to see the hidden architecture that maintains the illusion of our identity. We see that the matrix is not a physical prison, but a vibrational consensus held in place by the words we speak and the names we answer to. We are being called to develop a form of acoustic discernment, the ability to hear the binding quality of our labels, and to maintain a core of silence that remains untouched by the phonetic storms of the world. This section serves to strip away the familiarity of our names, revealing them as the intricate, geometric keys that lock us into a specific density of experience. We are preparing to move from the conceptual study of these pillars into the deeper, symbolic narratives that will illustrate the soul's struggle to find its voice in a world of echoes. To understand the weight of a name is to look beyond the mechanics of sound and into the heart of the myths that define our bondage. Imagine, if you will, a vast and ancient kingdom where every citizen is born into a grand, invisible tapestry. At the center of this kingdom sits the Great Weaver, a master architect of sound who possesses a loom made of starlight and shadow. When a new soul descends into the realm, the Weaver captures a single thread of their infinite light and ties it to a heavy iron spindle. Upon this spindle, a word is carved, the name. As the child grows, the spindle spins faster and faster, wrapping the thread of their life force around the iron core of that word. The music of the kingdom is a relentless, rhythmic chanting of these names, a symphony of the spindles that creates a thick, opaque fabric over the eyes of the people. This is the allegory of the vibrational shroud. The people believe the fabric is the world, never realizing they are staring at the back of their own labels, woven so tightly that the true light of the sun can no longer penetrate the weave. In this kingdom, there lived a seeker who noticed that the more people shouted his name, the heavier his limbs became. He felt as though he were walking through water, his every movement dictated by the tension of the thread connected to his spindle. One night, he fled to the silent mountains, a place where the air was so thin that the weaver's song could not reach. In the absolute quiet, a strange thing happened. The iron spindle at his feet began to glow and then dissolve into dust. Without the constant vibration of his name to hold it together, the person he thought he was simply evaporated. He realized that the name was not the anchor of his soul, but the anchor of his amnesia. In the silence, he heard for the first time the unspoken tone, the raw, unconditioned frequency of his source. This is the story of the decoupling of the self. It teaches us that the matrix does not hold us by force, but by the constant, sympathetic resonance we maintain with the labels we have been taught to love. To stop answering to the name is to cause the spindle of the matrix to spin in a vacuum, losing its grip on our destiny. Consider also the parable of the labyrinth of the echo. Imagine a traveler lost in a maze of crystalline walls. Every time she speaks, her voice bounces off the glass, returning to her from 1,000 different directions. Eventually, she becomes so surrounded by her own echoes that she believes there are thousands of people in the maze with her. She begins to argue with the echoes, to seek their approval, and to fear their judgment. She names the echoes father, mother, boss, and judge, forgetting that every single sound is merely a distorted version of her own original word. The name she carries is the primary echo, the first sound that hit the glass and started the cycle of confusion. The matrix is this crystal maze, and our names are the frequencies that keep the echoes alive. We are trapped not by walls of stone, but by walls of reverberation. We spend our lives reacting to the reputation of our names, the echoes of what the world thinks of us, never realizing that if we simply became silent, the walls of the maze would become transparent, revealing that there was never any labyrinth at all, only a vast, open field of light. There is another narrative, whispered in the corridors of the hidden archives, concerning the Book of the Dead Names. It is said that the Matrix maintains a grand ledger, where every name ever spoken is recorded in the ink of time. This ledger is the memory of the machine. As long as your name is in the book, the machine can calculate your trajectory, for a name is a closed loop. It has a beginning in birth and an ending in death. But the ancient texts speak of the nameless ones, those who have learned to vibrate at a frequency that the ink of the ledger cannot hold. These are the beings who have recognized that their name is a temporal contract, a temporary lease on a persona that must eventually be returned to the landlord. By refusing to identify with the lease, they become invisible to the ledger. They move through the matrix like ghosts through a wall, for the machine can only track that which has a fixed phonetic coordinate. This is the allegory of ontological fugitivity, the state of being so vast and so fluid that no single frequency of language can ever truly bind you. Finally, we reflect on the myth of the naming of the stars. It is told that once, the stars were sovereign beings who sang their own songs across the heavens. But a great grammarian arrived and gave each star a name, categorizing them into constellations and assigning them roles in the stories of men. As soon as the stars were named, they stopped singing and began to follow the paths laid out for them by the astronomers. They became celestial clockwork, bound to a rigid geometry of destiny. We are those fallen stars. Our names are the constellations that keep us moving in predictable orbits. To reclaim our sovereignty is to unname ourselves, to step out of the constellation and back into the original, chaotic, and beautiful song of our own light. We must realize that the destiny associated with our names is merely a mathematical projection of the matrix, and that our true path lies in the spaces between the words, in the dark matter of the soul where no name has ever been spoken. These narratives serve to illuminate the psychological and spiritual spatial tension created by our identities. They show us that the name is a linguistic gravity that pulls us down into the density of the simulation. By seeing ourselves as the weaver, the traveler in the maze, and the fallen star, we begin to feel the artificiality of the phonetic cage. We are being prepared to move from the symbolic understanding of our captivity into the practical methods of integration. The ways in which we can inhabit the frequency of the name without being consumed by it. We are learning to play the game of the matrix while maintaining the silent, nameless authority of the observer who knows that the word was the beginning of the prison, but the silence is the beginning of the exit. To transition from the mythic realm into the tangible rhythm of daily existence is to practice the art of vibrational decoupling. We have identified that the name is a frequency that binds us to the matrix, but we live in a world that demands its use for almost every transaction of life. Practical sovereignty, therefore, is not about the legal abandonment of one's name, which often leads only to a different form of friction, but about the internal retuning of one's relationship to that sound. It begins with the realization that the name is a tool of the interface, much like a username for a digital platform. When you hear your name called, you learn to observe the biological hit it creates in your nervous system. You notice how your posture shifts, how your breath tightens, and how your mind immediately prepares a persona to meet the call. By becoming a conscious observer of this reaction, you create a microscopic gap of silence between the stimulus of the name and the response of the ego. In this gap, the matrix loses its power to automate your behavior. A second practical takeaway involves the sanctification of silence. In a world that is obsessed with naming and claiming, the sovereign individual cultivates a secret garden of the nameless. This is a daily practice where you spend time in absolute stillness, consciously dropping all titles, roles, and phonetic identities. You are not a father, a worker, a citizen, or even the name on your birth certificate. You are simply the primary observer. This practice acts as a frequency reset, clearing the accumulated static of the social labels. When you return to the world of words, you do so with the awareness that you are wearing your name rather than being it. This creates a psychological buffer that prevents the stresses and projections attached to your name from reaching your core essence. You begin to treat your name as a diplomatic passport, a document used to navigate foreign territories that does not define the traveler's true home. Furthermore, we must address the linguistic hygiene of our daily speech. Since the matrix is held together by the frequency of words, the way we speak about ourselves and others either reinforces the cage or thins the bars. Practical integration involves moving away from identity-binding language. Instead of saying, "I am name," which reinforces the ontological lock, one might internally shift to, "I am currently answering to name." While subtle, this shift in internal syntax signals to the subconscious that the being is separate from the label. Likewise, when interacting with others, we begin to recognize that their names are also frequencies that bind them. By looking past their labels and speaking to the silent observer within them, we create a resonant field of sovereignty. We stop feeding the character in the simulation and begin to acknowledge the player behind the screen. This makes our interactions less transactional and more profound, as we are no longer just two names clashing in the dark, but two lights recognizing each other through the weave of the phonetic shroud. In the professional and legal realms, this understanding manifests as procedural detachment. When signing documents, paying bills, or engaging with bureaucratic systems, the sovereign individual recognizes that they are interacting with the dead fiction of the name, the all-caps entity on the ledger. We learn to fulfill the requirements of the simulation without granting it our emotional consent. We recognize that the debt or the obligation is attached to the name, not the being. This doesn't mean we ignore our responsibilities, but we stop allowing those responsibilities to define our self-worth or our peace of mind. We are the executor of the name's estate, managing its affairs with cold, professional clarity, while keeping our true treasure, our peace and our presence, hidden in the vault of the nameless. This is the ultimate matrix hack, playing the game so well that the system has no reason to flag you, while remaining entirely free on the inside. Finally, we must consider the reclamation of the voice. Since our names have been used to entrain our frequency, we can use our own voice to retune our field. The use of vowel sounds, chanting, or focused humming can help to break up the rigid geometric patterns created by the phonetic cage. By experimenting with sounds that have no meaning in the matrix, sounds that are purely vibrational, We remind ourselves of the primordial, unconditioned resonance of the source. This is the alchemical solvent that dissolves the iron spindles of the weaver. As we become more adept at this, we find that we can vibrate through the constraints of the simulation. We become inaudible to the predatory frequencies of the system, for we are no longer singing the song it expects to hear. We are moving toward a state of harmonic autonomy, where we use the name as a bridge, but we live in the music of the infinite. This practical integration serves as the instruction manual for the soul's escape within the world. It shows us that sovereignty is not a destination, but a vibrational stance. By applying these methods, we begin to feel the atmospheric thinning of the matrix's grip. We are no longer drowning in the echo. We are the ones standing on the shore, watching the ripples fade. We are preparing for the final transition, where all the sections merge into a single, transformational call to return to the source, the place where the word is forgotten and the light is all that remains. We have journeyed through the phonetic architecture of our own imprisonment, unmasking the name as a rhythmic anchor and a geometric cage. We have seen the weaver at her loom and the traveler in the maze of echoes, and we have learned the subtle arts of navigational detachment and vibrational hygiene. Now, we arrive at the final summit of our exploration, where the separate threads of knowledge must be woven into a singular, transformative realization. The frequency of your name is not merely a social inconvenience or a legal tether. It is the final threshold of the ego. To unname oneself is not an act of literal erasure, but a profound spiritual resurrection. It is the moment when the soul ceases to be a character in a pre-recorded broadcast and becomes the silence that allows the broadcast to exist. We are being called to step out of the word and back into the light, recognizing that the matrix only has power over that which it can categorize, measure, and address. The transformational call of this realization is an invitation to inhabit the frequency of no self, a state of being that is so vast and so fluid that no linguistic label can ever truly contain it. This is the ultimate sovereign stance, to move through the world of names while remaining anchored in the nameless. When you stop seeking your identity in the phonetics of your label, you become a glitch in the labyrinth. The machine looks for a fixed coordinate, a predictable persona, and a measurable trajectory, but it finds only a shimmering void of pure presence. This is the invisible path spoken of by the ancients, the ability to walk through the simulation without leaving a footprint. By reclaiming your silent origin, you are performing a cosmic act of rebellion. You are choosing to be the one who watches, rather than the one who is played. This shift in perspective is the true exit frequency, for it dissolves the very medium through which the matrix exerts its control. To inhabit this final stage, you must embrace the authority of the void. The name you carry was given to you by a system that requires your limitation. The silence you find within was given to you by the source that requires your infinity. The struggle for sovereignty is ultimately a choice between these two authorities. Do you answer to the bell of the weaver, or do you answer to the pull of the golden thread? The transformation requires you to be the librarian of your own light, carefully distinguishing between the administrative fiction of your name and the radiant fact of your existence. This is a call to radical introspection. It requires you to look into the mirror of your life and see not the man or the woman with a history and a title, but the eternal observer who has merely been dreaming that they were a name. The scrubbing of the truth is an impossibility once the dreamer has awakened, for the truth is not a piece of information, but the very quality of the light that remains when the name is finally allowed to fade. As you step back into the currents of the world, carry the silence of the source as an invisible shield. When the matrix calls out to you, demanding that you identify yourself, that you take a side, or that you defend your reputation, simply breathe into the nameless space behind your heart. Let the frequency of the name pass through you like wind through a screen. You are no longer the target. You are the space that the target once occupied. By refusing to be bound by the phonetic cage, you create a vacuum of sovereignty that naturally dismantles the illusions of those around you. You become a living reminder that the world of words is merely a thin veil over an ocean of mystery. Your life becomes a masterpiece of harmonic autonomy, a song that is sung for the joy of the vibration itself, rather than to fulfill a script written by a mechanical weaver. The journey of the name is the journey of the return. It is the path from the static back to the symphony, from the echo back to the origin. You are the sovereign broadcaster of your own reality, and the frequency you choose to embody is the only law you must follow. The Great Return is not a movement in space, but a shift in resonance. It is the moment you realize that you were never bound to the matrix. You were simply tuning into it. Now, you have the dial in your own hand. Turn away from the clamor of the labels, move past the jagged geometry of the person, and enter the deep, resonant peace of the nameless. There, you will find that you have always been free, always been infinite, and always been the silence that the universe has been waiting to hear. The word was the beginning of the dream, but the silence is the awakening. Go now, and be the light that has no name.